coming down here. Let's get going. So welcome everyone. It's a special opportunity for us to spend some time with the bishop. It doesn't happen very often. From my experience, he's a very nice, friendly guy, so we'll have some good conversation. So welcome. Thank you for coming out. And Bishop Delzer, first I want to thank you for taking the time to come. I know you're a busy person, so it's an honor to have you. Secondly, I'd like to thank you for your leadership, especially your spiritual leadership of the Synod. 172 congregations, that's quite a load. You do a nice job. And lastly, thanks for taking the time to help us as we go through this transition process. Knowing that we have your help and your support from the Synod is really comforting, and your leadership will certainly be appreciated. So we'll start the evening by letting Bishop Delzer say a few words, and then we'll start taking questions. I have a stack of questions that people have written. So if you wrote those questions, it'd be nice if you would ask them. If not, I can go through the list and I can ask them on your behalf. But, even if you didn't submit a question, feel free to raise your hand and take a shot at asking one. I think most everybody's probably fair game. Yeah. Okay, so Bishop Delzer, thank you.
Very good. Do I need to be careful of where I'm at? Okay, thank you. There are some sheets coming around. I did not anticipate this big a crowd, so this is great. I go to a lot of churches where the number of people at these two tables. So it's great to be here with all of you. So there aren't going to be enough sheets for everybody to have one. Okay. They say there's more chairs if you need chairs. Okay. So anyway, there's some sheets coming around, and you're going to have to do a lot of sharing. I guess I have to say that. And what they are, it's a little bit of information about the Synod, just sort of generally to just give you some clues. There's one that says the Southeastern Minnesota Synod of the ELCA, and has some pictures, 3 pictures under it. And on there is our Synod's mission statement, which is equipping congregations and leaders to follow Jesus into a changing world. We all know how the world is changing and how the church is changing, and often it seems like it's changing a whole lot faster than we would like. But we trust that Jesus is out there ahead of us and knows where it is that Jesus wants us to go in the church and in the world. And so the trick for us is discerning how best to follow Jesus. So I see as a significant role for myself and the people in the office of the bishop is to help our congregations and leaders in that process of discerning how do we best follow Jesus. There are 3 priorities we have as a Synod: developing leaders, equipping congregations, and accompanying our global partners. Developing leaders, all the stuff that you're doing with Sunday school and confirmation and youth group, that's all part of developing leaders. What we do in our seminaries is developing leaders. Our campus ministries in Winona and Mankato are developing leaders. So lots of things that we're doing. At our last Synod Assembly, we asked people to give us the names, particularly of young people, who they thought might have the gifts and skills to be a pastor, a deacon, or a synodically authorized minister. We got 70 names. And we'll be having what's called a discernment event coming up in November. And we've invited those folks to come to that gathering to spend some time together helping them discern, is God in fact calling them to that kind of leadership, that kind of ministry in the church. One of the best things you can do to help with raising up leaders is for you here in the congregation to be watching for people you think have the gifts and skills. I became a pastor because as far back as I can remember, everybody around me said, we think you should be a pastor. My pastor, my teachers, my parents, my grandparents, and look what happened. So keep your eye out for those who you think, and what we've discovered is that it's best if we actually start planting those seeds when kids are about 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Now, later is not too late. Some of you who are in that second stage of life, we have lots of second career people too, but always be kind of watching for somebody who you think would make a great pastor or a deacon in the church. Equipping congregations, there we have three big things that we're doing. One is called Stewardship for All Seasons. It's obviously about stewardship. The second is called Lead, Living Every Day as Disciples. That has to do with developing leadership and kind of refocusing on mission. And the third is called Hope in Christ, which is helping particularly small congregations to think intentionally about their future and so that they can be vital congregations. Two things that are unique about all three of those. Number one, congregations have skin in the game. In other words, they're not just free programs, they're subsidized by the Synod. But congregations also are putting some money into participating. And second, every congregation that participates in one of those three things gets a coach. Somebody with experience in that particular area who works with the leadership team and the congregation through the whole year-long process. So two unique and different ways of trying to help equip our congregations. And then third, accompanying our global partners. We have three global partners. The first is the Lutheran Church in Colombia in South America, a very small church. In a country of 65 million people, there's only 1,500 Lutherans. It's a heavily Catholic country. But they are doing amazing work with people who live in the barrios, people who live in the margins of society, the poorest of the poor. Our second partner is the Central Diocese of the Lutheran Church in Tanzania. The Lutheran Church in Tanzania has 6.5 million members. It's twice as big as the ELCA. Believe it or not, there are 20 million Lutherans in Africa. The picture of Lutheranism is changing radically when you set it in the framework of the whole world. I think in the Central Diocese, there are about 25 dioceses in the Tanzanian Lutheran Church. And their system is, there'll be a congregation that has a pastor, and then that congregation will have anywhere from 3 to 8 kind of preaching points that are served by an evangelist. And when one of those preaching points gets big enough to be a congregation, then they get a pastor, and that one develops another 3 to 8 preaching points. And that's how they've grown. Just a few years ago, there were only about 50,000 Lutherans in Tanzania. There are now 6.5 million. So it's some amazing growth and some things we can learn from that. Our third partner is the emerging Lutheran Church in South Sudan. You might be familiar with what's going on in Sudan. There's been like 50 years plus of civil war and continuing conflict. In 2011, Sudan split into Sudan in the north and South Sudan. The north is primarily Arab and Muslim. The south is primarily Christian and African. There are lots of Sudanese immigrants here in southeastern Minnesota. We have 5 South Sudanese worshiping groups here in southeastern Minnesota, in Owatonna, Austin, and Rochester. I've been working with immigrants from Sudan for 17 years, and I've been there a couple of times already. One of the pictures on the sheet in the center is of a building that's being developed in Juba, the capital of South Sudan, and it's actually now finished. The dedication is going to happen in November. It will provide a community center, worship space, education space, and maybe most importantly, a clinic. 1 in 7 women dies in childbirth in South Sudan, and it's one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world. So there's desperate need for medical care. That clinic will probably serve up to 50,000 people. And the church in Tanzania, where there is quite an established hospital in the city of Arusha. Actually, a doctor from America who spent his career there, Dr. Jacobson, he's going to use some of his staff from his hospital in Tanzania to help train staff in this new clinic in South Sudan. So it's now one African church helping another one. We in Southeastern Minnesota are the ones who initiated all of this ministry with the South Sudanese. And a couple of years ago, the church-wide organization, the ELCA, came alongside, and that's why this building is happening, that's shared. So just, that's a little bit about some of the, what I think are some of the amazing things that are going on in our shared ministry here. On the back side of that sheet is just a bunch of statistics and a listing of all the staff members in the office of the bishop, so forth. I tend to distinguish between the office of the bishop and the synod, because the synod, the word synod means walking together. It's a Greek word. The synod is all of us. It's not just that office at Assisi Heights in Rochester. That's the office of the bishop. And our responsibility is to help develop leaders, equip congregations, and help all of us accompany our global partners. So you'll often hear me distinguish between the office of the bishop and the synod. The synod is all of us, all 172 churches here in southeastern Minnesota. The other sheet, this side just gives you kind of the structure of the synod, some of the tables and committees and so forth. And then the other side of that is actually a monthly piece that goes out that lists highlights some of the events that are coming up. One I would emphasize in the lower left, for the very first time ever, we are having a Synod Youth Gathering, November 17th to the 19th, in Owatonna. So hopefully you might have some of the teenagers going to that youth gathering, our first ever. And then, of course, there's that once every 500 years event coming up, the celebration of the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. And if you go to the Synod website, you can see a listing of some of the activities that are taking place around that celebration. That's enough. How about questions? That was just in case you were falling asleep. All right, that'll work. All right. There it is.
This is a question off the post-it notes. I'm hoping I'm getting it correct. Earlier when you talked about developing leaders,
Yes.
did you talk about lay leaders, either how the synod develops them or how you can help congregations develop their own lay leaders?
Thank you. One of the big things that we do to help equip lay leaders is an event called Renew. It happens in February, end of February. It's a Saturday event, and it's really intended for members of church councils to come, and there's both some kind of skills learnings about how do I do this job, but there's always some kind of theme. Last year we really focused on equipping people to have difficult conversations in healthy ways, congregations, as we talk about things like racism and immigration and things like that. So that's one significant thing that we do. Another is people on the staff in the office of the bishop frequently will come and meet with church councils to do kind of a training or visioning process. So that's another way. And hopefully serving on the council is a learning experience. I know as a pastor in a congregation, on our church council, we were always reading a book together, focused either on how we do this work or on kind of the mission of the church. And we'd read a chapter a month and then talk about that as part of our meeting. That was a part of helping to train those lay leaders.
What's a bishop's duty?
What's a bishop's duty?
Yeah.
What isn't? Well, I've been at it now for 4 years, so I'm starting to figure it out. Technically, according to the Constitution, the bishop is the pastor to the synod. So you could say that I'm the pastor to the pastors. So I spend a lot of time with pastors and deacons. And it's one of the things I love to do. But I also, just like this evening, I spend almost every Sunday, I'm in one of our congregations. Of our 172 congregations, I've been in about 130 of them over the 4 years. So coming to congregations and talking just like this, talking a little bit about the work that we share together. I also have responsibilities that go beyond the synod. So there are 65 synods in the ELCA, which means there are 65 bishops. And 3 times a year, all of the bishops come together for a week. And we then are talking about issues that affect the whole church. In fact, that's where I was just about 2 weeks ago. I was in Chicago for that. What else do I do? Oh, I have a staff. I'm not in the office all that often because I'm typically out visiting or doing things like that. I do a lot of speaking. I kind of discovered that most everywhere you go, you go and you're just going to enjoy the event, and somebody says, "Well, we're going to have a few words from the bishop." Really? So a lot of that. And I also participate in a lot of church anniversaries. So we're in a kind of a time period where a lot of churches are having 100 or 125th or 150th anniversary. So my schedule, I already have events scheduled to be at in 2019. Because they want to make sure that the bishop is there for the anniversary. My next open preaching date isn't until next March. So I'm pretty booked up. I do try to take a Sunday off every so often. The church where I'm a member, in 4 years I've been there 4 times. I'm waiting for the pastor to visit me. Oh.
Is it hard being a bishop and do you travel a lot?
Do you travel a lot? Is it hard? The way that I often describe it is almost all of the stuff I do is really good stuff, but it's relentless. So yeah, I drive 25 to 30,000 miles a year, and I probably fly another 40 to 50,000 miles a year. So yeah, a fair amount of travel. But I really enjoy what I do. It is a real privilege to serve in this call. This is not something I ever wanted to do or ever planned to do. My plan actually was to have retired 2 years ago. So yeah, one nice thing is our synod isn't that so huge. Some synods, well, for instance, in Minnesota, in the state of Minnesota, there are 6 synods. Southwest, Southeast, Northwest, Northeast, Minneapolis area, St. Paul area. Every synod is partnered up with another synod in the United States. Our partner synod is the New England Synod. So we're one state with 6 synods. New England is one synod with 6 states. So that bishop is lucky if he's in his office even one day a week. So, and that's what we are supposed to do, is be out and about with the people we serve. I know there were a bunch of other questions. Oh, here we go. Which way are we going? Okay.
Juliet, go up. Juliet, go first. Go up to the mic. Go up to the mic. This is Lindsay's question. I'll do out here, okay? What is your role in assigning new pastoral candidates graduating from the seminaries?
Okay. Everybody here? Well, actually, at the Conference of Bishops was the fall assignment. So the way that it works is there are 65 synods with 9 regions. And so in our region, we are Region 3, which is North Dakota, South Dakota, and Minnesota. And between those 3 states, there's 9 synods. So one person, one bishop from each of the 9 regions, there are 9 regions in the country. One bishop from each of the 9 regions meets together with some seminary faculty, and together they assign those who are graduating, so those candidates. They assign them to regions. Then the next step is that the bishops of that region sit down together and assign the people that we got for our region. So this last assignment process, we have between our 9 synods in the Dakotas and Minnesota, we had somewhere between 50 and 60 places that would be good for a first call pastor. We got 9 names. I got 1. And that leads into the shortage. Right now, approximately 400 pastors a year are retiring, and we're only getting 200 new graduates each year. So every year we're losing ground. The scarier thing is that by 2019, there will still be over 9,000 congregations in the ELCA, but only 6,000 will be able to afford a pastor. The other 3,000 won't even be able to afford a full-time pastor. 6,000 will, but there will only be 5,000 pastors available. So 1,000 congregations who could afford a full-time pastor, there won't be one for them. That's why we're so focused on raising up new leaders. We sat down in my office, we sat down and went through our roster, and we figured out that over the next 3 years, 35 of our pastors will reach retirement age. Now that doesn't mean that they'll retire, but some will. So our goal is over the next 3 years to raise up 35 new leaders. And we already have 25 in our candidacy program. So people who are already preparing to be pastors that come from our synod. We are what's called a net producer. We produce a lot more pastors than we get back. But then we have a lot more. As they say, Lutherans here are more dense. Yes?
So this is kind of a different question, but what do you think about our church
What do I think about your church truthfully? Well, I have to say, I am impressed with this turnout tonight. When I go, every time I go to a church on a Sunday, I try to do an adult forum afterwards, and there might be 100 or 200 people in church, and there might be 20 who come to the forum. So, this to me speaks about the vitality and the great health of this church. that this many of you of all ages are here to kind of have this conversation. I did look at your, you can go online and get the trends for membership and attendance and all that stuff. And I realized that that's really kind of leveled off and even dropped off some. That's not unusual. That's happening all around the church. But one of the things we try to do with helping a congregation, particularly times like this, is helping to find interim pastors like Pastor John. And thanks to him for the invitation to be here this evening. He knew that it would be a long time before he could get me on a Sundays. And I don't know about here, but there are some churches I know, even here in our synod, where the Wednesday attendance is larger than the Sunday attendance. So we're kind of recognizing Sunday is not the only day that you can worship God. Hopefully we do it every day, but we can do it together. It doesn't have to be on a Sunday. So I mean, I have a pretty positive view of this congregation and a sense that growth is going to happen here, especially if that whole destination medical center thing gets off the ground. Those people are not all going to live in Rochester. And Castle is not that far away. It took me 20 minutes to drive here. Yeah. Yes.
Well, what's your role going to be in eventually placing the pastor?
Pastor, okay.
What you or your office?
Yeah. Yeah, I'd be Reverend Susan Miller from my office. She's responsible for call process. So here's how it'll work. You have a transition team in place, right? Okay. And has that transition team started working on the ministry site profile yet?
No.
No, okay. So that'll be, once the transition team has kind of done its work, then whether it's that team or another team or the council or it's together, we'll put together what's called the ministry site profile. So that's a profile of the congregation. It's several pages long. There's lots of information there, and it is really important because when we start lifting up the names of potential candidates to be your pastor, that's what they get. So that's the first impression, is what they read in that ministry site profile. So that's really important. Once that's done, then Reverend Miller will come and there'll be a congregational meeting, what we call a town hall meeting. And everybody will get to see a copy of that ministry site profile, and then everybody gets to weigh in and say, does this really reflect who we are? Or is this just a reflection of what this little group of 9 people said we are? We used to run into that problem where, the call committee would put it together and it would turn out to be not what the congregation really was like. So it could be misleading. So this town hall piece happens, and then that's when you'll start to get names. There are 3 sources for names of potential candidates. One of those are names that you raise up. Maybe you've been somewhere where you heard a pastor you thought was really great and you think, wow, we ought to try to get that person. Or maybe it's somebody who's a pastor at a church you used to belong to, or somebody you heard about. So names you raise up. And with all of those names then, the process we have to follow, if they're from a different synod, we have to contact that pastor's bishop and ask the bishop, is it okay if we contact this pastor? And I mean, typically the bishop will say yes. But then we can contact that pastor and say, we'd like your name to be able to go here to St. John's. Would you be interested? So that's one source. Second source are names that my office would offer. So once we see your site profile and what we know about your congregation, we try to do the best job we can of matching somebody who we think will be a good marriage. We are not going to send you a pastor who we think is going to blow the place apart. We want it to work. And then the third source are pastors who ask for their names to come here. There may be a pastor in a neighboring community who says, I always wanted to be the pastor there in Castle. And if they ask, then we'll respect that. And we'll let you know the sources of those names. So then once all of those names are, we've kind of checked with them, we send them your site profile, and then they say, yes, let's go ahead with the process or not. And then it comes, they also have what's called a rostered leader profile. So the call committee will get those and look those over. Typically, in today's world with the shortage of pastors, we're only able to give congregations 2, 3, or 4 names. The old days of getting half a dozen or a dozen names, that just doesn't happen anymore. So then it's up to the call committee to kind of weed through that to decide who do we want to interview. And actually we ask that you don't ask us for any more names until you interview all the names you've given me. Then usually through that process, they narrow it down to maybe 1 or 2 finalists. They'll do a second interview, and then they'll decide. Then they'll go to the church council, and the council will put together the compensation package, and then there will be a congregational meeting at which the congregation will learn who the prime candidate is, and you get to vote on that person. The process up until the meeting is pretty confidential. The primary reason for that is there will be pastors in that process whose congregations don't know that they're interviewing somewhere else. And so it's to respect that confidentiality. Is that a long enough answer to a question? Yeah.
If our congregation calls a pastor, isn't he supposed to alert his congregation at that time?
Yes.
So they can be informed of support?
Yeah. Actually, I should add one more piece. In today's world, pastors can be interviewing in more than one congregation at the same time. So if you're looking for a reincarnation of Jesus, give it up. If you come across a candidate that you think this looks like a pretty good person, don't fool around because you could very well lose them to somewhere else. We've had that happen a few times already. So yeah, once it's made clear that this is the candidate of choice, they withdraw from any other processes they're in. And as soon as that call comes, then they let their congregation know that they are receiving another call. Yeah. And once that happens, it can take as little as a few weeks for a new pastor to come, but in all likelihood, it can also take a few months. Particularly depending on what time of year. If it's a pastor with kids in school, they might want to be able to finish out the school year. It might be that they've got a house they have to sell. It might be that there's some unique thing in the congregation they're in that they have to kind of take care of that before they can finish up. So the whole process, from the time you actually start the call process till you have a new pastor in place, can easily be 18 months to, well, I should say from the beginning of an interim, can easily be from 18 months to even a couple of years. And that's why I think, Pastor John has been here already close to a year. It's just, and then we also have to do background checks on the people. And those can take, that's dependent on people getting the information back to us. So I know it's a long, drawn-out process, and we've done everything we can to try to work with that. Yeah, John.
I want to say that I'm trying to assure them that the time we spend here is all the better making us ready when we come time to call.
Yep.
Right? So it's not time wasted. And I told you when I came, I'm your real pastor, and we'll be fine. And the longer we spend, your transition team is doing an incredible job, and you are helping out, and the better we can line up that profile with what really is going to work here, the better chance we have of calling a pastor that's going to stay here for a long time. So that's the idea. I don't want us to feel like we're in a hurry to to get that done. Okay? Because good solid ground is being laid. All right.
And this is a desirable place to be. I mean, it's a large congregation, it's got a healthy children's ministry and youth ministry program in place, a variety of worship opportunities, it's close to a major city. I bet you can even be in the Twin Cities in what, an hour? Yeah. So I mean, this is a desirable place. Other questions? Yeah.
What advice can you give to church leadership as they move through this process?
Continue, like Pastor John said, continue to have conversations like this. Talk with one another. When you start working on that, particularly with the transition team, and when you start working on ministry site profile, don't be afraid to ask people, does this look like us? Try to be as honest as you can. Wrap it all in prayer. You know, one of the things that I just think is most helpful is if everybody in this room make a commitment to pray daily for this process here in your congregation. Asking God to guide you through the process and to bring you the pastor that God wants you to have. Simple prayer, takes less than a minute. That's still one of the more significant things we can do, I think. And then the conversation. And don't ever be afraid to contact us in my office. If you have questions, if you run into roadblocks, don't hesitate to contact us. Yes?
Being a bishop is a 6-year term, is that right?
Yes.
Have you started your process for the election for a couple of years?
We have just begun the transition process for electing a bishop, and it will be a new bishop. I'm going to be 70 years old in 2 years when I finish. And I have 7 grandchildren that I just need to spend more time with, or want to spend more time with. My 2 oldest grandchildren are 12 years old. If I did another term, they could be getting married by the time. And not only does the person in this office, you pay a price to do this work, but so does your family. One of my grandsons has special needs and lives in Nashville, our oldest daughter's family. And I, before being bishop, I would go there for a week every year, usually like spring break or something, and take care of their kids so that they could have a break. Because with a special needs kid, it's just a lot more demanding. And I haven't been able to do that since I've been bishop. So things like that I've just decided not to do a second term. It has nothing to do with not liking the work. I really love doing this. Although I do miss the parish. I miss seeing the same people every Sunday. I miss the deep relationships. I don't get to do funerals and baptisms anymore. And those are such meaningful times with families, so I really do miss the parish. But yes, we have begun the process. There is a committee for the election of a bishop, and also there's the forming of a transition team because one focuses on raising up the nominees and that process, and another one focuses on the transition pieces that need to happen. One of those is everybody who is on the staff in the office of the bishop has to offer their resignations. It's what's called coterminous. Now, the new bishop may choose to keep some or all of them, but also may not. So it affects their lives too, and so that's all part of that transition piece. But yeah, we knew it was important to start about 2 years ago to make sure we do it well. So you might be thinking about any pastor in the ELCA can be bishop. It does not have to be a pastor from this synod, although they always have been from this synod. I'm only our third bishop. So this is, I like to say our previous two bishops have tended the synod very, very well. I'm trying not to screw it up. Yes?
So it sounds like if we wait 2 years, you and your office are all available to be our pastor.
Yeah. We'll get it done.
How has the role of the pastor changed in the church over the last 25 years? And where do you see that going in the future?
Okay, everybody here? Okay, how has the role of pastor changed in the last 25 years, and where do I see that going in the future? I've been a pastor for 42 years. The most significant changes that I've seen, one is there's just more administrative kind of stuff, especially if you're a pastor in a larger congregation. So that's one change. A second change is there's a growing balance between male and female pastors. In the seminaries, that's just about 50-50 right now. And with all the retirements that are happening, that's another piece that's going to happen in the future. There'll be more of a balance between males and females. Other changes. One thing that hasn't changed is prime responsibility is still word and sacrament ministry. So preaching, administering the sacraments, and pastoral care. Visiting, particularly visiting the sick and the dying and so forth. Those things don't change. I think there are more demands on pastors these days. More people think they can tell the pastor what to do. They know that sense of kind of the pastor up here and who would ever challenge the pastor. That's pretty well gone. And that, in many ways, that's a good thing. That's a good thing. So I think that's another change. What else? I think more and more pastors have to be active participants in their communities. They need to get outside the walls of the church building and be actively participating in the community. Whenever I came to a new congregation, first thing I asked either the secretary, if there was one, or the president of the congregation was, make me a list of all of the events in this town that I need to be sure I show up at in the next year. So that the church sees, I'm planning to stay here. And I want to be a part of the community. I mean, I recommend joining a service club or something like that, Rotary or Lions or whatever it is. In a smaller towns I've been in anyway, one of the things I loved was the local restaurant or cafe where all the guys gathered at 10 o'clock for rolls and coffee. I made sure I went to that at least once a week. You'll learn a lot. So I think that's increasingly important. And also I think pastors have to be more what I call entrepreneurial. Kind of thinking about what are some new ways that we need to think about of doing things. Because some of the old ways were great, but they just don't work anymore. So kind of that entrepreneurial spirit. Those are some of the things, at least, that I've seen. Yes?
There's a mom over in the corner that would like to ask a question.
Oh. Have I neglected this corner?
I'm just curious what the average length of stay of a pastor is.
Okay.
I mean, I know that varies greatly depending on the size of the church, but I know it's not a lifetime anymore. So.
The average length of stay of a pastor in a congregation. My first parish I was in 3 years. My second parish I was in 1 year. Now, really my third parish, there was kind of some in-between time there. I was at for 17 years. And then I did interim ministry like Pastor John for some years. And then my last parish in Fairview, I was there 11 years. I would say the average is probably somewhere around 7, 8 years, maybe 10. Those long stays just are pretty rare anymore. I have one classmate who spent his entire ministry in one place. But then, 2 years ago, he got run out. So, that's one of the secrets is, my dad always used to say, you want to leave before you have to. So my dad's limit was 10 years. So as soon as I got to 10 years, he was calling me every week saying, well, what are you moving? What are you moving?
Does size make a difference?
Pardon?
Does size make a difference?
Yeah, I think it can. For a lot of people, the majority of pastors probably grow up in larger congregations in bigger cities. And then they get sent out to a small town of 1,500 people and a small church. And then they just have a hard time often adjusting to that. And so they may only stay 3 or 4 years and move on to something else. With our first call pastors, I try to tell them, okay, we expect you to stay 3 years in that first call. Remember, this is not a life sentence. And I'm a small town guy. I love small towns. I like being able to walk down the street and know people. I don't mind people stopping me in the grocery store and asking me a question about church. And so I'm always looking for pastors for a lot of places in our synod who are going to be comfortable with being part of the community. One of the real blessings is, over time, you become the pastor of the town, even though there are other churches. And I thought that was kind of cool myself, but not everybody does. You're close enough to cities. You need to get away and go up to the cities. But yeah, I'd say right around 7, 8 years. Yes?
What type of individual are you? The reason I'm asking is if you wouldn't have been a pastor, what would have been your second choice?
Here's another one of my dad's lines. He said, you have the choice. You have a choice of 3 things. You can be a pastor, a doctor, or a lawyer. And in that order. So, what would I have done? I actually took a leave of absence from ministry, the place I was at for a year. I left there and went into a family business. We had a family construction business. And I went and worked in that business for 3 years. And I enjoyed that work, but what I really learned working in business was how to manage people. And that really helped being the lead pastor of a church with a big staff. They don't teach that in seminary. What else would I have done? I'm not sure, because I have loved being a pastor. And I want every pastor to love it as much as I do. It's been a great life. And I know I hear the stories about, pastors and congregations that get into big fights and they throw on things and screaming, and I've never had that happen. I mean, some of you may know I was a pastor in the Missouri Synod for a lot of years before coming into the ELCA. But even that leaving was only because it was the district leadership that said I was just too liberal. And then they were going to make me be much more restrictive, and I said, I can't in good conscience do that. So, but even that was a friendly leaving. So, yeah, I love it. I don't think I could have been a lawyer. Any lawyers in the room? Yeah, maybe a doctor. But the doctors I've known work harder than I do.
Any more?
One more.
You talked about doing background checks and more development. We have issues with that. But being shortage of ministers available, you know, we could end up going out of the Synod. You have a system in your office, your synods, that you can pass that information back on a person,
Yes.
so that we get that fit, because an interview isn't always the best way to find out if that person is fit.
Yeah, actually, the background check goes to anywhere that the person has served in the last 5 years. So there's a sheet that goes to their previous congregation, filled out by the president of the congregation, letting us know if there have been any allegations of misconduct or anything like that. We've been really fortunate. I've only had one sexual misconduct in my 4 years, and that was my first year right at Christmas. So, if you're gonna do it, don't do it at Christmas. Those are really nasty and messy.
Well, I didn't really need a background check, but if that person would fit with our church and New Guinea, more than anything, that's what I was.
One piece that the call committee will never see, but the bishop and the bishop's staff person will see, is the bishop's confidential recommendation. So any pastor from our synod who wants their papers to be put out, I fill out a personal recommendation where I say, here's what I think about this person. What their strengths are, what their failings are. And then there's also one other spot to check. Is it important to have a personal phone call? And if that's checked, then I'm going to call that bishop and say, okay, you checked that. Tell me about this person. What's with this?
Well, and also, isn't there on their roster leader profile, don't they have recommenders that the call committee actually?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Because I've served as that for a friend from
Yeah.
seminary as well, so.
Yeah, on their papers, on their roster leader profile, they list references. And certainly call committees need to call those references. Any of you who are in business, you know how important it is to call those references. And the last thing, among us as bishops, the last thing we want to do is pass a bad pastor to someone else. So that's one of the things I've had to do is probably half a dozen times is work out a severance package where the pastor probably just shouldn't be a pastor anymore. So trying to make sure we don't send a bad pastor to another church. And there aren't many of those. And most of the pastors are great, deeply committed.
If you've got any out there, we look for a phone of Pastor John.
We have deeply appreciated the interim ministry that he has done for us here in the Synod. Yes, he is one of the finest interim pastors we have. So, make sure you tell the call committee.
I'm going home.
He talks about Montana all the time in the office, so I don't think he'll survive here. We have to let him go back.
And I understand my mom and 3 of my brothers live in Montana, right in the mountains, so I understand. You know, it's beautiful there. Anything else? All right. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here with you and for sticking around for this time.